Welcome back to O'Clock in the Journal, where timeless stories come alive. Today, we continue our journey into the world of Maurice Leblanc with The Hollow Needle, a thrilling tale of hidden treasures, cunning deceptions, and the unmatched intellect of Arsène Lupin. Let's begin. Chapter 4. Face to Face. One evening, 5 weeks later, I had given my man leave to go out. It was the day before the 14th of July. The night was hot. A storm threatened, and I felt no inclination to leave the flat. I opened wide the glass doors leading to my balcony, lit my reading lamp, and sat down in an easy chair to look through the papers, which I had not yet seen. It goes without saying that there was something about Arsène Lupin in all of them. Since the attempt at murder, of which poor Isidore Beautrelet had been the victim, not a day had passed without some mention of the Ambrumisi mystery. It had a permanent headline devoted to it. Never had public opinion been excited to that extent, thanks to the extraordinary series of hurried events, of unexpected and disconcerting surprises. Monsieur Filil, who was certainly accepting the secondary part allotted to him with a good faith worthy of all praise, had let the interviewers into the secret of his young advisor's exploits during the memorable 3 days, so that the public was able to indulge in the rashest suppositions. And the public gave itself free scope. Specialists and experts in crime, novelists and playwrights, retired magistrates and chief detectives, erstwhile Lecoqs and budding Holmlock Shearses, each had his theory and expounded it in lengthy contributions to the press. Everybody corrected and supplemented the inquiry of the examining magistrate, and all on the word of a child, on the word of Isidore Beautrelet, a sixth-form schoolboy at the Lycée Janson de Sailly. For really, it had to be admitted, the complete elements of the truth were now in everybody's possession. What did the mystery consist of? They knew the hiding place where Arsène Lupin had taken refuge and lain a-dying. There was no doubt about it. Dr. Delattre, who continued to plead professional secrecy and refused to give evidence, nevertheless confessed to his intimate friends, who lost no time in blabbing, that he really had been taken to a crypt to attend a wounded man whom his confederates introduced to him by the name of Arsène Lupin. And, as the corpse of Étienne de Vaudreuil was found in that same crypt, and as the said Étienne de Vaudreuil was none other than Arsène Lupin, as the official examination went to show, all this provided an additional proof, if one were needed, of the identity of Arsène Lupin and the wounded man. Therefore, with Lupin dead, and Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran's body recognized by the curb bracelet on her wrist, the tragedy was finished. It was not. Nobody thought that it was, because Beautrelet had said the contrary. Nobody knew in what respect it was not finished, but, on the word of the young man, the mystery remained complete. The evidence of the senses did not prevail against the statement of a Beautrelet. There was something which people did not know, and of that something they were convinced that he was in position to supply a triumphant explanation. It is easy, therefore, to imagine the anxiety with which, at first, people awaited the bulletins issued by the 2 Dieppe doctors to whose care the Comte de Gesvres entrusted his patient, the distress that prevailed during the first few days, when his life was thought to be in danger, and the enthusiasm of the morning when the newspapers announced that there was no further cause for fear. The least details excited the crowd. People wept at the thought of Beautrelet nursed by his old father, who had been hurriedly summoned by telegram, and they also admired the devotion of Mademoiselle Suzanne de Gesvres, who spent night after night by the wounded lad's bedside. Next came a swift and glad convalescence. At last, the public were about to know. They would know what Beautrelet had promised to reveal to Monsieur Filleul, and the decisive words which the knife of the would-be assassin had prevented him from uttering. And they would also know everything, outside the tragedy itself, that remained impenetrable or inaccessible to the efforts of the police. With Beautrelet free and cured of his wound, one could hope for some certainty regarding Harlington, Arsène Lupin's mysterious accomplice, who was still detained at the Santé prison. One would learn what had become after the crime of Brédoux the clerk, that other accomplice, whose daring was really terrifying. With Beautrelet free, one could also form a precise idea concerning the disappearance of Ganimard and the kidnapping of Shears. How was it possible for two attempts of this kind to take place? Neither the English detectives nor their French colleagues possessed the slightest clue on the subject. On Whitsunday, Ganimard did not come home, nor on the Monday either, nor during the 5 weeks that followed. In London, on Whit Monday, Holmlock Shears took a cab at 8 o'clock in the evening to drive to the station. He had hardly stepped in when he tried to alight, probably feeling a presentiment of danger. But 2 men jumped into the hansom, one on either side, flung him back on the seat and kept him there between them, or rather under them. All this happened in sight of 9 or 10 witnesses who had no time to interfere. The cab drove off at a gallop. And, after that, nothing. Nobody knew anything. Perhaps also Beautrelet would be able to give the complete explanation of the document, the mysterious paper to which Brédoux, the magistrate's clerk, attached enough importance to recover it, with blows of the knife, from the person in whose possession it was. The problem of the hollow needle, it was called, by the countless solvers of riddles who, with their eyes bent upon the figures and dots, strove to read a meaning into them. The hollow needle. What a bewildering conjunction of 2 simple words. What an incomprehensible question was set by that scrap of paper whose very origin and manufacture were unknown. The hollow needle. Was it a meaningless expression, the puzzle of a schoolboy scribbling with pen and ink on the corner of a page? Or were they 2 magic words which could compel the whole great adventure of Lupin the Great Adventurer to assume its true significance? Nobody knew. But the public soon would know. For some days, the papers had been announcing the approaching arrival of Beautrelet. The struggle was on the point of recommencing, and this time it would be implacable on the part of the young man who was burning to take his revenge. And, as it happened, my attention just then was drawn to his name, printed in capitals. The Grand Journal headed its front page with the following paragraph: "We have persuaded M. Isidore, Beautrelet, to give us the first right of printing his revelations. Tomorrow, Tuesday, before the police themselves are informed, the Grand Journal will publish the whole truth of the Ambrumésy mystery." That's interesting, eh? What do you think of it, my dear chap? I started from my chair. There was someone sitting beside me, someone I did not know. I cast my eyes round for a weapon. But, as my visitor's attitude appeared quite inoffensive, I restrained myself and went up to him. He was a young man with strongly marked features, long, fair hair, and a short, tawny beard, divided into 2 points. His dress suggested the dark clothes of an English clergyman, and his whole person, for that matter, wore an air of austerity and gravity that inspired respect. "Who are you?" I asked. And, as he did not reply, I repeated, "Who are you? How did you get in? What are you here for?" He looked at me and said, "Don't you know me?" "No, no." "Oh, that's really curious. Just search your memory. One of your friends, a friend of a rather special kind. However," I caught him smartly by the arm, "you lie! You lie! No, you're not the man you say you are. It's not true." "Then why are you thinking of that man rather than another?" he asked with a laugh. Oh, that laugh! That bright and clear young laugh whose amusing irony had so often contributed to my diversion. I shivered. Could it be? "No, no," I protested, with a sort of terror. "It cannot be." "It can't be I, because I'm dead, eh?" he retorted. "And because you don't believe in ghosts." He laughed again. "Am I the sort of man who dies? Do you think I would die like that, shot in the back by a girl? Really, you misjudge me, as though I would ever consent to such a death as that." "So it is you?" I stammered, still incredulous and yet greatly excited. "So it is you! I can't manage to recognize you." "In that case," he said gaily, "I am quite easy. If the only man to whom I have shown myself in my real aspect fails to know me today, then everybody who will see me henceforth as I am today is bound not to know me either, when he sees me in my real aspect, if indeed I have a real aspect. I recognized his voice, now that he was no longer changing its tone, and I recognized his eyes also, and the expression of his face, and his whole attitude, and his very being, through the counterfeit appearance in which he had shrouded it. "Arsène Lupin," I muttered. "Yes, Arsène Lupin," he cried, rising from his chair. "The one and only Arsène Lupin, returned from the realms of darkness, since it appears that I expired and passed away in a crypt. Arsène Lupin, alive and kicking, in the full exercise of his will, happy and free, and more than ever resolved to enjoy that happy freedom in a world where hitherto he has received nothing but favors and privileges." It was my turn to laugh. "Well, it's certainly you, and livelier this time than on the day when I had the pleasure of seeing you last year. I congratulate you." I was alluding to his last visit, the visit following on the famous adventure of the diadem, his interrupted marriage, his flight with Sonia Kirchhoff, and the Russian girl's horrible death. On that day I had seen an Arsène Lupin whom I did not know, weak, downhearted, with eyes tired with weeping, seeking for a little sympathy and affection. "Be quiet," he said. "The past is far away." "It was a year ago," I observed. "It was 10 years ago," he declared. "Arsène Lupin's years count for 10 times as much as another man's." I did not insist, and changing the conversation, "How did you get in?" "Why, how do you think?" "Through the door, of course." Then, as I saw nobody, I walked across the drawing-room and out by the balcony, and here I am. "Yes, but the key of the door?" "There are no doors for me, as you know. I wanted your flat, and I came in." "It is at your disposal. Am I to leave you?" "Oh, not at all. You won't be in the way. In fact, I can promise you an interesting evening." "Are you expecting someone?" "Yes. I have given him an appointment here at 10 o'clock. He took out his watch. "It is 10 now. If the telegram reached him, he ought to be here soon." The front doorbell rang. "What did I tell you? No, don't trouble to get up. I'll go." With whom on earth could he have made an appointment? And what sort of scene was I about to assist at, dramatic or comic? For Lupin himself to consider it worthy of interest, the situation must be somewhat exceptional. He returned in a moment and stood back to make way for a young man, tall and thin and very pale in the face. Without a word, and with a certain solemnity about his movements that made me feel ill at ease, Lupin switched on all the electric lamps, one after the other, till the room was flooded with light. Then the two men looked at each other, exchanged profound and penetrating glances, as if, with all the effort of their gleaming eyes, they were trying to pierce into each other's souls. It was an impressive sight to see them thus, grave and silent. But who could the newcomer be? I was on the point of guessing the truth, through his resemblance to a photograph which had recently appeared in the papers, when Lupin turned to me. "My dear chap, let me introduce Monsieur Isidore Beautrelet." And, addressing the young man, he continued, "I have to thank you, M. Beautrelet, first for being good enough, on receipt of a letter from me, to postpone your revelations until after this interview, and, secondly, for granting me this interview with so good a grace." Beautrelet smiled. "Allow me to remark that my good grace consists, above all, in obeying your orders. The threat which you made to me in the letter in question was the more peremptory in being aimed not at me, but at my father." "My word," said Lupin, laughing, "we must do the best we can, and make use of the means of action vouchsafed to us. I knew by experience that your own safety was indifferent to you, seeing that you resisted the arguments of Master Brédoux. There remained your father for whom you have a great affection. I played on that string." "And here I am," said Beautrelet approvingly. I motioned them to be seated. They consented, and Lupin resumed, in that tone of imperceptible banter which is all his own. "In any case, Monsieur Beautrelet, if you will not accept my thanks, you will at least not refuse my apologies." "Apologies? Bless my soul, what for? For the brutality which Master Brédoux showed you. I confess that the act surprised me. It was not Lupin's usual way of behaving. A stab. I assure you I had no hand in it. Brédoux is a new recruit. My friends, during the time that they had the management of our affairs, thought that it might be useful to win over to our cause the clerk of the magistrate himself who was conducting the inquiry. Your friends were right. Brédoux, who was specially attached to your person, was, in fact, most valuable to us, but, with the ardor peculiar to any neophyte who wishes to distinguish himself, he pushed his zeal too far and thwarted my plans by permitting himself, on his own initiative, to strike you a blow. Oh, it was a little accident. Not at all, not at all, and I have reprimanded him severely. I am bound, however, to say in his favor that he was taken unawares by the really unexpected rapidity of your investigation. If you had only left us a few hours longer, you would have escaped that unpardonable attempt, and I should doubtless have enjoyed the enormous advantage of undergoing the same fate as Monsieur Ganimard and Mr. Holmlock Shears? Exactly, said Lupin, laughing heartily. And I should not have known the cruel terrors which your wound caused me. I have had an atrocious time because of it, believe me, and at this moment your pallor fills me with all the stings of remorse. Can you ever forgive me? The proof of confidence which you have shown me in delivering yourself unconditionally into my hands. It would have been so easy for me to bring a few of Ganimard's friends with me. That proof of confidence wipes out everything. Was he speaking seriously? I confess frankly that I was greatly perplexed. The struggle between the two men was beginning in a manner which I was simply unable to understand. I had been present at the first meeting between Lupin and Holmlock Shears in the café near the Gare Montparnasse, and I could not help recalling the haughty carriage of the two combatants, the terrific clash of their pride under the politeness of their manners, the hard blows which they dealt each other, their feints, their arrogance. Here it was quite different. Lupin, it is true, had not changed. He exhibited the same tactics, the same crafty affability. But what a strange adversary he had come upon. Was it even an adversary? Really, he had neither the tone of one nor the appearance. Very calm, but with a real calmness, not one assumed to cloak the passion of a man endeavoring to restrain himself. Very polite, but without exaggeration. Smiling, but without chaff, he presented the most perfect contrast to Arsène Lupin, a contrast so perfect even that, to my mind, Lupin appeared as much perplexed as myself. No, there was no doubt about it. In the presence of that frail stripling, with cheeks smooth as a girl's and candid and charming eyes, Lupin was losing his ordinary self-assurance. Several times over, I observed traces of embarrassment in him. He hesitated, did not attack frankly, wasted time in mawkish and affected phrases. It also looked as though he wanted something. He seemed to be seeking, waiting. What for? Some aid? There was a fresh ring of the bell. He himself ran and opened the door. He returned with a letter. "Will you allow me, gentlemen?" he asked. He opened the letter. It contained a telegram. He read it, and became as though transformed. His face lit up, his figure righted itself, and I saw the veins on his forehead swell. It was the athlete who once more stood before me, the ruler, sure of himself, master of events and master of persons. He spread the telegram on the table and, striking it with his fist, exclaimed, "Now, Monsieur Beautrelet, it's you and I." Beautrelet adopted a listening attitude, and Lupin began in measured, but harsh and masterful tones. "Let us throw off the mask. What say you? And have done with hypocritical compliments. We are two enemies, who know exactly what to think of each other. We act toward each other as enemies, and therefore we ought to treat with each other as enemies." "To treat?" echoed Beautrelet in a voice of surprise. "Yes, to treat. I did not use that word at random, and I repeat it, in spite of the effort, the great effort, which it costs me. This is the first time I have employed it to an adversary. But also, I may as well tell you at once, it is the last. Make the most of it. I shall not leave this flat without a promise from you. If I do, it means war." Beautrelet seemed more and more surprised. He said very prettily, "I was not prepared for this. You speak so funnily. It's so different from what I expected." "Yes, I thought you were not a bit like that. Why this display of anger? Why use threats? Are we enemies because circumstances bring us into opposition? Enemies? Why?" Lupin appeared a little out of countenance, but he snarled and, leaning over the boy, "Listen to me, youngster," he said. "It's not a question of picking one's words. It's a question of a fact, a positive, indisputable fact, and that fact is this. In all the past 10 years, I have not yet knocked up against an adversary of your capacity. With Ganimard and Holmlock Shears I played as if they were children. With you, I am obliged to defend myself, I will say more, to retreat. Yes, at this moment you and I well know that I must look upon myself as worsted in the fight. Isidore Beautrelet has got the better of Arsène Lupin. My plans are upset. What I tried to leave in the dark you have brought into the full light of day. You annoy me, you stand in my way. Well, I've had enough of it. Brédoux told you so to no purpose. I now tell you so again, and I insist upon it, so that you may take it to heart. I've had enough of it." Beautrelet nodded his head. "Yes, but what do you want?" "Peace. Each of us minding his own business, keeping to his own side. That is to say, you free to continue your burglaries undisturbed, I free to return to my studies." "Your studies? Anything you please. I don't care. But you must leave me in peace. I want peace. How can I trouble it now?" Lupin seized his hand violently. "You know quite well. Don't pretend not to know. You are at this moment in possession of a secret to which I attach the highest importance. This secret you were free to guess, but you have no right to give it to the public." "Are you sure that I know it?" "You know it, I am certain. Day by day, hour by hour, I have followed your train of thought and the progress of your investigations. At the very moment when Brédoux struck you, you were about to tell all. Subsequently, you delayed your revelations, out of solicitude for your father. But they are now promised to this paper here. The article is written. It will be set up in an hour. It will appear tomorrow." "Quite right." Lupin rose and slashing the air with his hand. "It shall not appear," he cried. "It shall appear," said Beautrelet, starting up in his turn. At last, the two men were standing up to each other. I received the impression of a shock, as if they had seized each other round the body. Beautrelet seemed to burn with a sudden energy. It was as though a spark had kindled within him a group of new emotions: pluck, self-respect, the passion of fighting, the intoxication of danger. As for Lupin, I read in the radiance of his glance the joy of the duelist who at length encounters the sword of his hated rival. "Is the article in the printer's hands?" "Not yet." "Have you it there, on you?" "No fear. I shouldn't have it by now in that case." "Then, one of the assistant editors has it in a sealed envelope. If I am not at the office by midnight, he will have set it up." "Oh, the scoundrel!" muttered Lupin. "He has provided for everything." His anger was increasing, visibly and frightfully. Beautrelet chuckled, jeering in his turn, carried away by his success. "Stop that, you brat!" roared Lupin. "You're forgetting who I am. And that, if I wished, upon my word, he's daring to laugh." A great silence fell between them. Then Lupin stepped forward, and, in muttered tones, with his eyes on Beautrelet's, "You shall go straight to the Grand Journal." "No." "Tear up your article." "No." "See the editor." "No." "Tell him you made a mistake." "No." "And write him another article, in which you will give the official version of the Ambrumésy mystery, the one which everyone has accepted." "No." Lupin took up a steel ruler that lay on my desk and broke it in two without an effort. His pallor was terrible to see. He wiped away the beads of perspiration that stood on his forehead. He, who had never known his wishes resisted, was being maddened by the obstinacy of this child. He pressed his two hands on Beautrelet's shoulder and, emphasizing every syllable, continued. "You shall do as I tell you, Beautrelet. You shall say that your latest discoveries have convinced you of my death, that there is not the least doubt about it. You shall say so because I wish it, because it has to be believed that I am dead. You shall say so, above all, because if you do not say so, because, if I do not say so, your father will be kidnapped tonight, as Ganimard and Holmlock Shears were." Beautrelet gave a smile. "Don't laugh. Answer." "My answer is that I am very sorry to disappoint you, but I have promised to speak, and I shall speak." "Speak in the sense which I have told you." "I shall speak the truth," cried Beautrelet eagerly. "It is something which you can't understand, the pleasure, the need, rather, of saying the thing that is, and saying it aloud. The truth is here, in this brain, which has guessed it and discovered it, and it will come out, all naked and quivering. The article, therefore, will be printed as I wrote it. The world shall know that Lupin is alive, and shall know the reason why he wished to be considered dead. The world shall know all." And he added, calmly, "And my father shall not be kidnapped." Once again they were both silent, with their eyes still fixed upon each other. They watched each other. Their swords were engaged up to the hilt. And it was like the heavy silence that goes before the mortal blow. Which of the two was to strike it? Lupin said between his teeth. "Failing my instructions to the contrary, 2 of my friends have orders to enter your father's room tonight, at 3 o'clock in the morning, to seize him and carry him off to join Ganimard and Holmlock Shears." A burst of shrill laughter interrupted him. "Why, you highwayman, don't you understand," cried Beautrelet, "that I have taken my precautions? So you think that I am innocent enough, ass enough, to have sent my father home to his lonely little house in the open country?" Oh, the gay, bantering laughter that lit up the boy's face! It was a new sort of laugh on his lips, a laugh that showed the influence of Lupin himself. And the familiar form of address which he adopted placed him at once on his adversary's level. He continued, "You see, Lupin, your great fault is to believe your schemes infallible. You proclaim yourself beaten, do you? What humbug! You are convinced that you will always win the day in the end, and you forget that others can have their little schemes too. Mine is a very simple one, my friend." It was delightful to hear him talk. He walked up and down, with his hands in his pockets, and with the easy swagger of a boy teasing a caged beast. Really, at this moment, he was revenging, with the most terrible revenges, all the victims of the great adventurer. And he concluded, "Lupin, my father is not in Savoy. He is at the other end of France, in the center of a big town, guarded by 20 of our friends, who have orders not to lose sight of him until our battle is over. Would you like details? He is at Cherbourg, in the house of one of the keepers of the arsenal. And remember that the arsenal is closed at night, and that no one is allowed to enter it by day, unless he carries an authorization and is accompanied by a guide." He stopped in front of Lupin and defied him, like a child making faces at his playmate. "What do you say to that, master?" For some minutes Lupin had stood motionless. Not a muscle of his face had moved. What were his thoughts? Upon what action was he resolving? To anyone knowing the fierce violence of his pride, the only possible solution was the total, immediate, final collapse of his adversary. His fingers twitched. For a second I had a feeling that he was about to throw himself upon the boy and wring his neck. "What do you say to that, master?" Beautrelet repeated. Lupin took up the telegram that lay on the table, held it out, and said very calmly, "Here, baby, read that." Beautrelet became serious, suddenly, impressed by the gentleness of the movement. He unfolded the paper and at once, raising his eyes, murmured, "What does it mean? I don't understand." "At any rate, you understand the first word," said Lupin. "The first word of the telegram, that is to say, the name of the place from which it was sent. Look, Cherbourg." "Yes, yes," stammered Beautrelet. Yes, I understand. Cherbourg. And then? And then? I should think the rest is quite plain. Removal of luggage finished. Friends left with it, and will wait instructions till 8 morning. All well. Is there anything there that seems obscure? The word luggage. Pooh! You wouldn't have them write M. Beautrelet, Senior? What then? The way in which the operation was performed? The miracle by which your father was taken out of Cherbourg Arsenal, in spite of his 20 bodyguards? Pooh, it's as easy as ABC. And the fact remains that the luggage has been dispatched. What do you say to that, baby? With all his tense being, with all his exasperated energy, Isidore tried to preserve a good countenance. But I saw his lips quiver, his jaw shrink, his eyes vainly strive to fix upon a point. He lisped a few words, then was silent, and suddenly gave way, and, with his hands before his face, burst into loud sobs. "Oh, father! Father!" An unexpected result, which was certainly the collapse which Lupin's pride demanded, but also something more, something infinitely touching and infinitely artless. Lupin gave a movement of annoyance and took up his hat, as though this unaccustomed display of sentiment were too much for him. But on reaching the door he stopped, hesitated, and then returned, slowly, step by step. The soft sound of the sobs rose like the sad wailing of a little child overcome with grief. The lad's shoulders marked the heart-rending rhythm. Tears appeared through the crossed fingers. Lupin leaned forward and, without touching Beautrelet, said, in a voice that had not the least tone of pleasantry, nor even of the offensive pity of the victor, "Don't cry, youngster. This is one of those blows which a man must expect when he rushes headlong into the fray, as you did. The worst disasters lie in wait for him. The destiny of fighters will have it so. We must suffer it as bravely as we can." Then, with a sort of gentleness, he continued, "You are right, you see. We are not enemies. I have known it for long. From the very first, I felt for you, for the intelligent creature that you are, an involuntary sympathy and admiration. And that is why I wanted to say this to you. Don't be offended, whatever you do. I should be extremely sorry to offend you, but I must say it. Well, give up struggling against me. I am not saying this out of vanity, nor because I despise you. But, you see, the struggle is too unequal. You do not know. Nobody knows all the resources which I have at my command. Look here. This secret of the hollow needle which you are trying so vainly to unravel. Suppose for a moment that it is a formidable, inexhaustible treasure, or else an invisible, prodigious, fantastic refuge, or both, perhaps. Think of the superhuman power which I must derive from it. And you do not know, either, all the resources which I have within myself, all that my will and my imagination enable me to undertake and to undertake successfully. Only think that my whole life, ever since I was born, I might almost say, has tended toward the same aim, that I worked like a convict before becoming what I am, and to realize, in its perfection, the type which I wish to create, which I have succeeded in creating. That being so, what can you do? At that very moment when you think that victory lies within your grasp, it will escape you. There will be something of which you have not thought, a trifle, a grain of sand which I shall have put in the right place, unknown to you. I entreat you, give up. I should be obliged to hurt you, and the thought distresses me." And, placing his hand on the boy's forehead, he repeated, "Once more, youngster, give up. I should only hurt you. Who knows if the trap into which you will inevitably fall has not already opened under your footsteps?" Beautrelet uncovered his face. He was no longer crying. Had he heard Lupin's words? One might have doubted it, judging by his inattentive air. For 2 or 3 minutes he was silent. He seemed to weigh the decision which he was about to take, to examine the reasons for and against, to count up the favorable and unfavorable chances. At last he said to Lupin, "If I change the sense of the article, if I confirm the version of your death, and if I undertake never to contradict the false version which I shall have sanctioned, Do you swear that my father will be free?" "I swear it." "My friends have taken your father by motor car to another provincial town. At 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, if the article in the Grand Journal is what I want it to be, I shall telephone to them, and they will restore your father to liberty." "Very well," said Beautrelet. "I submit to your conditions." Quickly, as though he saw no object in prolonging the conversation, after accepting his defeat, he rose, took his hat, bowed to me, bowed to Lupin, and went out. Lupin watched him go, listened to the sound of the door closing, and muttered, "Poor little beggar." At 8 o'clock the next morning, I sent my man out to buy the Grand Journal. It was 20 minutes before he brought me a copy, most of the kiosks being already sold out. I unfolded the paper with feverish hands. Beautrelet's article appeared on the front page. I give it as it stood and as it was quoted in the press of the whole world, the Ambrumésy mystery. I do not intend in these few sentences to set out in detail the mental processes and the investigations that have enabled me to reconstruct the tragedy, I should say the twofold tragedy, of Ambrumésy. In my opinion, this sort of work and the judgments which it entails, deductions, inductions, analyses, and so on, are only interesting in a minor degree and, in any case, are highly commonplace. No, I shall content myself with setting forth the two leading ideas which I followed, and if I do that, it will be seen that, in so setting them forth, and in solving the two problems which they raise, I shall have told the story just as it happened, in the exact order of the different incidents. It may be said that some of these incidents are not proved, and that I leave too large a field to conjecture. That is quite true. But in my view, my theory is founded upon a sufficiently large number of proved facts to be able to say that even those facts which are not proved must follow from the strict logic of events. The stream is so often lost under the pebbly bed, it is nevertheless the same stream that reappears at intervals and mirrors back the blue sky. The first riddle that confronted me, a riddle not in detail but as a whole, was how came it that Lupin, mortally wounded one might say, managed to live for 5 or 6 weeks without nursing, medicine, or food, at the bottom of a dark hole. Let us start at the beginning. On Thursday, the 16th of April, at 4 o'clock in the morning, Arsène Lupin, surprised in the middle of one of his most daring burglaries, runs away by the path leading to the ruins and drops down shot. He drags himself painfully along, falls again, and picks himself up in the desperate hope of reaching the chapel. The chapel contains a crypt, the existence of which he has discovered by accident. If he can burrow there, he may be saved. By dint of an effort he approaches it. He is but a few yards away when a sound of footsteps approaches. Harassed and lost, he lets himself go. The enemy arrives. It is Mademoiselle Raymond de Saint-Véran. This is the prologue, or rather the first scene of the drama. What happened between them? This is the easier to guess inasmuch as the sequel of the adventure gives us all the necessary clues. At the girl's feet lies a wounded man, exhausted by suffering, who will be captured in 2 minutes. This man has been wounded by herself. Will she also give him up? If he is Jean Duval's murderer, yes, she will let destiny take its course. But, in quick sentences, he tells her the truth about this awful murder committed by her uncle, Monsieur de Gève. She believes him. What will she do? Nobody can see them. The footman Victor is watching the little door. The other, Albert, posted at the drawing-room window, has lost sight of both of them. Will she give up the man she has wounded? The girl is carried away by a movement of irresistible pity, which any woman will understand. Instructed by Lupin, with a few movements she binds up the wound with his handkerchief to avoid the marks which the blood would leave. Then, with the aid of the key which he gives her, she opens the door of the chapel. He enters, supported by the girl. She locks the door again and walks away. Albert arrives. If the chapel had been visited at that moment, or at least during the next few minutes, before Lupin had had time to recover his strength, to raise the flagstone and disappear by the stairs leading to the crypt, he would have been taken. But this visit did not take place until 6 hours later, and then only in the most superficial way. As it is, Lupin is saved. And saved by whom? By the girl who very nearly killed him. Thenceforth, whether she wishes it or no, Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran is his accomplice. Not only is she no longer able to give him up, but she is obliged to continue her work, else the wounded man will perish in the shelter in which she has helped to conceal him. Therefore she continues. For that matter, if her feminine instinct makes the task a compulsory one, it also makes it easy. She is full of artifice. She foresees and forestalls everything. It is she who gives the examining magistrate a false description of Arsène Lupin. The reader will remember the difference of opinion on this subject between the cousins. It is she, obviously, who, thanks to certain signs which I do not know of, suspects an accomplice of Lupin's in the driver of the fly. She warns him. She informs him of the urgent need of an operation. It is she, no doubt, who substitutes one cap for the other. It is she who causes the famous letter to be written, in which she is personally threatened. How, after that, is it possible to suspect her? It is she who, at that moment when I was about to confide my first impressions to the examining magistrate, pretends to have seen me the day before in the copsewood, alarms Monsieur Filol on my score, and reduces me to silence. A dangerous move, no doubt, because it arouses my attention and directs it against the person who assails me with an accusation which I know to be false, but an efficacious move, because the most important thing of all is to gain time and close my lips. Lastly, it is she who, during 40 days, feeds Lupin, brings him his medicine. The chemist at Ouville will produce the prescriptions which he made up for Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, nurses him, dresses his wound, watches over him, and cures him. Here we have the first of our two problems solved, at the same time that the Unabridged mystery is set forth. Arsène Lupin found, close at hand, in the chateau itself, the assistance which was indispensable to him in order, first, not to be discovered, and secondly, to live. He now lives. And we come to the second problem, corresponding with the second Unabridged mystery, the study of which served me as a conducting medium. Why does Lupin, alive, free, at the head of his gang, omnipotent as before, why does Lupin make desperate efforts with which I am constantly coming into collision, to force the idea of his death upon the police and the public? We must remember that Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran was a very pretty girl. The photographs reproduced in the papers after her disappearance give but an imperfect notion of her beauty. That follows which was bound to follow. Lupin, seeing this lovely girl daily for 5 or 6 weeks, longing for her presence when she is not there, subjected to her charm and grace when she is there, inhaling the cool perfume of her breath when she bends over him, Lupin becomes enamored of his nurse. Gratitude turns to love, admiration to passion. She is his salvation, but she is also the joy of his eyes, the dream of his lonely hours, his light, his hope, his very life. He respects her sufficiently not to take advantage of the girl's devotion, and not to make use of her to direct his confederates. There is, in fact, a certain lack of decision apparent in the acts of the gang, but he loves her also. His scruples weaken, and, as Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran refuses to be touched by a love that offends her, as she relaxes her visits when they become less necessary, as she ceases them entirely on the day when he is cured, desperate, maddened by grief, he takes a terrible resolve. He leaves his lair, prepares his stroke, and, on Saturday the 6th of June, assisted by his accomplices, he carries off the girl. This is not all. The abduction must not be known. All search, all surmises, all hope, even, must be cut short. Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran must pass for dead. There is a mock murder. Proofs are supplied for the police inquiries. There is doubt about the crime. A crime, for that matter, not unexpected. A crime foretold by the accomplices. A crime perpetrated to revenge the chief's death. And, through this very fact, observe the marvelous ingenuity of the conception. Through this very fact, the belief in this death is, so to speak, stimulated. It is not enough to suggest a belief. It is necessary to compel a certainty. Lupin foresees my interference. I am sure to guess the trickery of the chapel. I am sure to discover the crypt. And, as the crypt will be empty, the whole scaffolding will come to the ground. The crypt shall not be empty. In the same way, the death of Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran will not be definite, unless the sea gives up her corpse. The sea shall give up the corpse of Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran. The difficulty is tremendous. The double obstacle seems insurmountable, yes, to anyone but Lupin, but not to Lupin. As he had foreseen, I guess the trickery of the chapel. I discover the crypt, and I go down into the lair where Lupin has taken refuge. His corpse is there! Any person who had admitted the death of Lupin as possible would have been baffled. But I had not admitted this eventuality for an instant, first by intuition, and secondly by reasoning. Pretense thereupon became useless, and every scheme vain. I said to myself at once that the block of stone disturbed by the pickaxe had been placed there with a very curious exactness, that the least knock was bound to make it fall, and that, in falling, it must inevitably reduce the head of the false Arsène Lupin to pulp in such a way as to make it utterly irrecognizable. Another discovery. Half an hour later, I hear that the body of Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran has been found on the rocks at Dieppe, or rather a body which is considered to be Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran's, for the reason that the arm has a bracelet similar to one of that young lady's bracelets. This, however, is the only mark of identity, for the corpse is irrecognizable. Thereupon I remember and I understand. A few days earlier, I happened to read in a number of the Vigie de Dieppe that a young American couple staying at Anvermeu had committed suicide by taking poison, and that their bodies had disappeared on the very night of the death. I hastened to Anvermeu. The story is true, I am told, except insofar as concerns the disappearance, because the brothers of the victims came to claim the corpses and took them away after the usual formalities. The name of these brothers, no doubt, was Arsène Lupin and Company. Consequently, the thing is proved. We know why Lupin shammed the murder of the girl and spread the rumor of his own death. He is in love and does not wish it known. And, to reach his ends, he shrinks from nothing. He even undertakes that incredible theft of the two corpses which he needs in order to impersonate himself and Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran. In this way he will be at ease. No one can disturb him, no one will ever suspect the truth which he wishes to suppress. No one? Yes, 3 adversaries at the most might conceive doubts. Ganimard, whose arrival is hourly expected, Holmlock Shears, who is about to cross the channel, and I, who am on the spot. This constitutes a threefold danger. He removes it. He kidnaps Ganimard. He kidnaps Holmlock Shears. He has me stabbed by Brédoux. One point alone remains obscure. Why was Lupin so fiercely bent upon snatching the document about the Hollow Needle from me? He surely did not imagine that, by taking it away, he could wipe out from my memory the text of the 5 lines of which it consists. Then why? Did he fear that the character of the paper itself, or some other clue, could give me a hint? Be that as it may, this is the truth of the Ambrumésy mystery. I repeat that conjecture plays a certain part in the explanation which I offer, even as it played a great part in my personal investigation. But, if one waited for proofs and facts to fight Lupin, one would run a great risk either of waiting forever, or else of discovering proofs and facts carefully prepared by Lupin, which would lead in a direction immediately opposite to the object in view. I feel confident that the facts, when they are known, will confirm my surmise in every respect. So Isidore Beautrelet, mastered for a moment by Arsène Lupin, distressed by the abduction of his father and resigned to defeat, Isidore Beautrelet, in the end, was unable to persuade himself to keep silence. The truth was too beautiful and too curious. The proofs which he was able to produce were too logical and too conclusive for him to consent to misrepresent it. The whole world was waiting for his revelations. He spoke. On the evening of the day on which his article appeared, the newspapers announced the kidnapping of Monsieur Beautrelet Sr. Isidore was informed of it by a telegram from Cherbourg, which reached him at 3 o'clock. Chapter 5. On the Track. Young Beautrelet was stunned by the violence of the blow. As a matter of fact, although in publishing his article he had obeyed one of those irresistible impulses which make a man despise every consideration of prudence, he had never really believed in the possibility of an abduction. His precautions had been too thorough. The friends at Cherbourg not only had instructions to guard and protect Beautrelet the elder, they were also to watch his comings and goings, never to let him walk out alone, and not even to hand him a single letter without first opening it. No, there was no danger. Lupin, wishing to gain time, was trying to intimidate his adversary. The blow, therefore, was almost unexpected, and Isidore, because he was powerless to act, felt the pain of the shock during the whole of the remainder of the day. One idea alone supported him, that of leaving Paris, going down there, seeing for himself what had happened, and resuming the offensive. He telegraphed to Cherbourg. He was at Saint-Lazare a little before 9. A few minutes after, he was steaming out of the station in the Normandy Express. It was not until an hour later, when he mechanically unfolded a newspaper which he had bought on the platform, that he became aware of the letter by which Lupin indirectly replied to his article of that morning. To the editor of the Grand Journal. Sir, I cannot pretend but that my modest personality, which would certainly have passed unnoticed in more heroic times, has acquired a certain prominence in the dull and feeble period in which we live. But there is a limit beyond which the morbid curiosity of the crowd cannot go without becoming indecently indiscreet. If the walls that surround our private lives be not respected, what is to safeguard the rights of the citizen? Will those who differ plead the higher interest of truth? An empty pretext insofar as I am concerned, because the truth is known, and I raise no difficulty about making an official confession of the truth in writing. Yes, mademoiselle, de Saint-Véran is alive. Yes, I love her. Yes, I have the mortification not to be loved by her. Yes, the results of the boy Beautrelet's inquiry are wonderful in their precision and accuracy. Yes, we agree on every point. There is no riddle left. There is no mystery. Well then, what? Injured to the very depths of my soul, bleeding still from cruel wounds, I ask that my more intimate feelings and secret hopes may no longer be delivered to the malevolence of the public. I ask for peace, the peace which I need to conquer the affection of Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, and to wipe out from her memory the 1,000 little injuries which she has had to suffer at the hands of her uncle and cousin. This has not been told, because of her position as a poor relation. Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran will forget this hateful past. All that she can desire, were it the fairest jewel in the world, were it the most unattainable treasure, I shall lay at her feet. She will be happy, she will love me, but, if I am to succeed, once more, I require peace. That is why I lay down my arms and hold out the olive branch to my enemies, while warning them, with every magnanimity on my part, that a refusal on theirs might bring down upon them the gravest consequences. One word more on the subject of Mr. Harlington. This name conceals the identity of an excellent fellow, who is secretary to Cooley, the American millionaire, and instructed by him to lay hands upon every object of ancient art in Europe which it is possible to discover. His evil star brought him into touch with my friend Etienne de Vaudreuil, alias Arsène Lupin, alias myself. He learnt, in this way, that a certain Monsieur de Gesvres was willing to part with 4 pictures by Rubens, ostensibly on the condition that they were replaced by copies, and that the bargain to which he was consenting remained unknown. My friend Vaudreuil also undertook to persuade M. de Gesvres to sell his chapel. The negotiations were conducted with entire good faith on the side of my friend Vaudreuil, and with charming ingenuousness on the side of Mr. Harlington, until the day when the Rubenses and the carvings from the chapel were in a safe place and Mr. Harlington in prison. There remains nothing therefore to be done but to release the unfortunate American, because he was content to play the modest part of a dupe, to brand the millionaire Cooley, because, for fear of possible unpleasantness, he did not protest against his secretary's arrest, and to congratulate my friend Etienne de Vaudreuil, because he is revenging the outraged morality of the public by keeping the 100,000 francs which he was paid on account by that singularly unattractive person, Cooley. Pray pardon the length of this letter, and permit me to be, sir, your obedient servant, Arsène Lupin. Isidore weighed the words of this communication as minutely, perhaps, as he had studied the document concerning the Hollow Needle. He went on the principle, the correctness of which was easily proved, that Lupin had never taken the trouble to send one of his amusing letters to the press without absolute necessity, without some motive which events were sure, sooner or later, to bring to light. What was the motive for this particular letter? For what hidden reason was Lupin confessing his love and the failure of that love? Was it there that Beautrelet had to seek, or in the explanations regarding Mr. Harlington, or further still, between the lines, behind all those words whose apparent meaning had perhaps no other object than to suggest some wicked, perfidious, misleading little idea? For hours the young man, confined to his compartment, remained pensive and anxious. The letter filled him with mistrust, as though it had been written for his benefit and were destined to lead him, personally, into error. For the first time, and because he found himself confronted not with a direct attack, but with an ambiguous, indefinable method of fighting, he underwent a distinct sensation of fear, and, when he thought of his good old, easy-going father, kidnapped through his fault, he asked himself with a pang whether he was not mad to continue so unequal a contest. Was the result not certain? Had Lupin not won the game in advance? It was but a short moment of weakness, when he alighted from his compartment, at 6 o'clock in the morning, refreshed by a few hours' sleep. He had recovered all his confidence. On the platform, Froberval, the dockyard clerk who had given hospitality to M. Beautrelet, Sr., was waiting for him, accompanied by his daughter Charlotte, an imp of 12 or 13. "Well?" cried Isidore. The worthy man, beginning to moan and groan, he interrupted him, dragged him to a neighboring tavern, ordered coffee, and began to put plain questions, without permitting the other the slightest digression. "My father has not been carried off, has he?" It was impossible. Impossible. Still, he has disappeared. "Since when?" "We don't know." "What?" "No. Yesterday morning, at 6 o'clock, as I had not seen him come down as usual, I opened his door. He was gone." "But was he there on the day before, 2 days ago?" "Yes. On the day before yesterday, he did not leave his room. He was a little tired, and Charlotte took his lunch up to him at 12, and his dinner at 7 in the evening. So it was between 7 o'clock in the evening, on the day before yesterday, and 6 o'clock on yesterday morning that he disappeared?" "Yes, during the night before last." Only what?" "Well, it's like this. You can't leave the arsenal at night." "Do you mean that he has not left it?" "That's impossible. My friends and I have searched the whole naval harbor." "Then he has left it." "Impossible. Every outlet is guarded." Beautrelet reflected and then said, "What next?" "Next, I hurried to the commandant's and informed the officer in charge." "Did he come to your house?" "Yes, and a gentleman from the public prosecutor's also. They searched all through the morning, and when I saw that they were making no progress and that there was no hope left, I telegraphed to you." "Was the bed disarranged in his room?" "No, nor the room disturbed in any way." "No, I found his pipe in its usual place, with his tobacco and the book which he was reading. There was even this little photograph of yourself in the middle of the book, marking the page." "Let me see it." Froberval passed him the photograph. Beautrelet gave a start of surprise. He had recognized himself in the snapshot, standing, with his 2 hands in his pockets, on a lawn from which rose trees and ruins. Froberval added, "It must be the last portrait of yourself which you sent him. Look, on the back, you will see the date, the 3rd of April, the name of the photographer, R. de Val, and the name of the town, Lyon-sur-Mer, perhaps." Isidore turned the photograph over and read this little note in his own handwriting: R. de Val, 3, 4, Lyon. He was silent for a few minutes and resumed. My father hadn't shown you that snapshot yet? No, and that's just what astonished me when I saw it yesterday. For your father used so often to talk to us about you. There was a fresh pause, greatly prolonged. Froberval muttered, I have business at the workshop. We might as well go in. He was silent. Isidore had not taken his eyes from the photograph, was examining it from every point of view. At last the boy asked, Is there such a thing as an inn called the Lion d'Or at a short league outside the town? Yes, about a league from here. On the Route de Valognes, is it? Yes, on the Route de Valognes. Well, I have every reason to believe that this inn was the headquarters of Lupin's friends. It was from there that they entered into communication with my father. What an idea! Your father spoke to nobody. He saw nobody. He saw nobody, but they made use of an intermediary. What proof have you? This photograph. But it's your photograph. It's my photograph, but it was not sent by me. I was not even aware of its existence. It was taken, without my knowledge, in the ruins of Ambrumésy, doubtless by the examining magistrate's clerk, who, as you know, was an accomplice of Arsène Lupin's. And then? Then this photograph became the passport, the talisman, by means of which they obtained my father's confidence. But who? Who was able to get into my house? I don't know, but my father fell into the trap. They told him, and he believed that I was in the neighborhood, that I was asking to see him, and that I was giving him an appointment at the Golden Lion. But all this is nonsense. How can you assert? Very simply, they imitated my writing on the back of the photograph and specified the meeting place. Valognes Road, 3 kilometers 400, Lion Inn. My father came and they seized him, that's all. Very well, muttered Froberval, dumbfounded. Very well. I admit it, things happened as you say, but that does not explain how he was able to leave during the night. He left in broad daylight, though he waited until dark to go to the meeting place. But, confound it, he didn't leave his room the whole of the day before yesterday. There is one way of making sure. Run down to the dockyard, Froberval, and look for one of the men who were on guard in the afternoon 2 days ago. Only be quick if you wish to find me here. Are you going? Yes, I shall take the next train back. What? Why, you don't know. Your inquiry. My inquiry is finished. I know pretty well all that I wanted to know. I shall have left Cherbourg in an hour. Froberval rose to go. He looked at Beautrelet with an air of absolute bewilderment, hesitated a moment, and then took his cap. Are you coming, Charlotte? No, said Beautrelet. I shall want a few more particulars. Leave her with me. Besides, I want to talk to her. I knew her when she was quite small. Froberval went away. Beautrelet and the little girl remained alone in the tavern smoking-room. A few minutes passed, a waiter entered, cleared away some cups, and left the room again. The eyes of the young man and the child met, and Beautrelet placed his hand very gently on the little girl's hand. She looked at him for 2 or 3 seconds, distractedly, as though about to choke. Then, suddenly hiding her head between her folded arms, she burst into sobs. He let her cry, and after a while said, It was you, wasn't it, who did all the mischief, who acted as go-between? It was you who took him the photograph. You admit it, don't you? And when you said that my father was in his room 2 days ago, you knew that it was not true, did you not? Because you yourself had helped him to leave it? She made no reply. He asked, Why did you do it? They offered you money, I suppose, to buy ribbons with a frock? He uncrossed Charlotte's arms and lifted up her head. He saw a poor little face all streaked with tears, the attractive, disquieting, mobile face of one of those little girls who seem marked out for temptation and weakness. Come, said Beautrelet. It's over. We'll say no more about it. I will not even ask you how it happened. Only you must tell me everything that can be of use to me. Did you catch anything? Any remark made by those men? How did they carry him off? She replied at once. By motor car. I heard them talking about it. And what road did they take? Ah, I don't know that. Didn't they say anything before you? Something that might help us? No. Wait, though. There was one who said, We shall have no time to lose. The governor is to telephone to us at 8 o'clock in the morning. Where to? I can't say. I've forgotten. Try and remember. It was the name of a town, wasn't it? Yes, a name, like Chateau. Chateaubriand? Chateau Thierry? No. Chateauroux? Yes, that was it. Chateauroux. Beautrelet did not wait for her to complete her sentence. Already he was on his feet, and, without giving a thought to Froberval, without even troubling about the child, who stood gazing at him in stupefaction, he opened the door and ran to the station. Chateauroux, madame. A ticket for Chateauroux. Over Montour? Asked the booking clerk. Of course, the shortest way. Shall I be there for lunch? Oh, no. For dinner? Bedtime? Oh, no. For that, you would have to go over Paris. The Paris Express leaves at 9 o'clock. You're too late. It was not too late. Beautrelet was just able to catch the train. Well, said Beautrelet, rubbing his hands, I have spent only 2 hours or so at Cherbourg, but they were well employed. He did not for a moment think of accusing Charlotte of lying. Weak, unstable, capable of the worst treacheries, those petty natures also obey impulses of sincerity. And Beautrelet had read in her affrighted eyes her shame for the harm which she had done, and her delight at repairing it in part. He had no doubt, therefore, that Chateauroux was the other town to which Lupin had referred and where his confederates were to telephone to him. On his arrival in Paris, Beautrelet took every necessary precaution to avoid being followed. He felt that it was a serious moment. He was on the right road that was leading him to his father. One act of imprudence might ruin all. He went to the flat of one of his schoolfellows and came out, an hour later, irrecognizable. Rigged out as an Englishman of 30, in a brown check suit, with knickerbockers, woolen stockings, and a cap, a high-colored complexion, and a red wig. He jumped on a bicycle laden with a complete painter's outfit and rode off to the Gare d'Austerlitz. He slept that night at Issoudun. The next morning he mounted his machine at break of day. At 7 o'clock, he walked into the Chateauroux post office and asked to be put on to Paris. As he had to wait, he entered into conversation with the clerk and learnt that, 2 days before, at the same hour, a man dressed for motoring had also asked for Paris. The proof was established. He waited no longer. By the afternoon he had ascertained, from undeniable evidence, that a limousine car, following the Tours road, had passed through the village of Buzançais and the town of Chateauroux, and had stopped beyond the town, on the verge of the forest. At 10 o'clock, a hired gig, driven by a man unknown, had stopped beside the car and then gone off south, through the valley of the Buzan. There was then another person seated beside the driver. As for the car, it had turned in the opposite direction and gone north, toward Issoudun. Beautrelet easily discovered the owner of the gig, who, however, had no information to supply. He had hired out his horse and trap to a man who brought them back himself next day. Lastly, that same evening, Isidore found out that the motor car had only passed through Issoudun, continuing its road toward Orleans, that is to say, toward Paris. From all this, it resulted in the most absolute fashion that M. Beautrelet was somewhere in the neighborhood. If not, how was it conceivable that people should travel nearly 300 miles across France in order to telephone from Chateauroux, and next to return, at an acute angle, by the Paris road? This immense circuit had a more definite object: to move M. Beautrelet to the place assigned to him. And this place is within reach of my hand, said Isidore to himself, quivering with hope and expectation. My father is waiting for me to rescue him at 10 or 15 leagues from here. He is close by. He is breathing the same air as I. He set to work at once. Taking a War Office map, he divided it into small squares, which he visited one after the other, entering the farmhouses, making the peasants talk, calling on the schoolmasters, the mayors, the parish priests, chatting to the women. It seemed to him that he must attain his end without delay, and his dreams grew until it was no longer his father alone whom he hoped to deliver, but all those whom Lupin was holding captive: Raymond de Saint-Véran, Ganimard, Holmlock Shears perhaps, and others, many others, and in reaching them he would, at the same time, reach Lupin's stronghold, his lair, the impenetrable retreat where he was piling up the treasures of which he had robbed the wide world. But, after a fortnight's useless searching, his enthusiasm ended by slackening, and he very soon lost confidence. Because success was slow in appearing, from one day to the next almost, he ceased to believe in it, and though he continued to pursue his plan of investigations, he would have felt a real surprise if his efforts had led to the smallest discovery. More days still passed by, monotonous days of discouragement. He read in the newspapers that the Comte de Gesvres and his daughter had left Ambrumésy and gone to stay near Nice. He also learnt that Harlington had been released, that Gentleman's innocence having become self-obvious, in accordance with the indications supplied by Arsène Lupin. Isidore changed his headquarters, established himself for 2 days at the Châtelet, for 2 days at Argenton. The result was the same. Just then he was nearly throwing up the game. Evidently the gig in which his father had been carried off could only have furnished a stage, which had been followed by another stage furnished by some other conveyance. And his father was far away. He was thinking of leaving, when one Monday morning he saw, on the envelope of an unstamped letter, sent on to him from Paris, a handwriting that set him trembling with emotion. So great was his excitement that for some minutes he dared not open the letter for fear of a disappointment. His hand shook. Was it possible? Was this not a trap laid for him by his infernal enemy? He tore open the envelope. It was indeed a letter from his father, written by his father himself. The handwriting presented all the peculiarities, all the oddities of the hand which he knew so well. He read, "Will these lines ever reach you, my dear son? I dare not believe it. During the whole night of my abduction, we traveled by motor car. Then, in the morning, by carriage. I could see nothing. My eyes were bandaged. The castle in which I am confined should be somewhere in the Midlands, to judge by its construction and the vegetation in the park. The room which I occupy is on the 2nd floor. It is a room with 2 windows, one of which is almost blocked by a screen of climbing glycines. In the afternoon I am allowed to walk about the park, at certain hours, but I am kept under unrelaxing observation. I am writing this letter, on the mere chance of its reaching you, and fastening it to a stone. Perhaps, one day I shall be able to throw it over the wall, and some peasant will pick it up. But do not be distressed about me. I am treated with every consideration. Your old father, who is very fond of you and very sad to think of the trouble he is giving you, Beautrelet." Isidore at once looked at the postmarks. They read, Cugion, Indre. The Indre, the department which he had been stubbornly searching for weeks. He consulted a little pocket guide which he always carried. Cuzion, in the canton of Egazan. He had been there too. For prudence's sake, he discarded his personality as an Englishman, which was becoming too well known in the district, disguised himself as a workman, and made for Cuzion. It was an unimportant village. He would easily discover the sender of the letter. For that matter, chance served him without delay. "A letter posted on Wednesday last?" exclaimed the mayor, a respectable tradesman in whom he confided and who placed himself at his disposal. "Listen, I think I can give you a valuable clue. On Saturday morning, Gaffer Charel, an old knife grinder who visits all the fairs in the department, met me at the end of the village and asked, 'Monsieur le Maire, does a letter without a stamp on it go all the same?' 'Of course,' said I. 'And does it get there?' 'Certainly, only there's double postage to pay on it, that's all the difference.' 'And where does he live?' 'He lives over there, all alone, on the slope, the hovel that comes next after the churchyard.' 'Shall I go with you?' It was a hovel standing by itself, in the middle of an orchard surrounded by tall trees. As they entered the orchard, 3 magpies flew away with a great splutter, and they saw that the birds were flying out of the very hole in which the watchdog was fastened. and the dog neither barked nor stirred as they approached. Beautrelet went up in great surprise. The brute was lying on its side, with stiff paws, dead. They ran quickly to the cottage. The door stood open. They entered. At the back of a low, damp room, on a wretched straw mattress, flung on the floor itself, lay a man fully dressed. "Gaffer Charel!" cried the mayor. "Is he dead too?" The old man's hands were cold, his face terribly pale, but his heart was still beating, with a faint, slow throb, and he seemed not to be wounded in any way. They tried to resuscitate him, and, as they failed in their efforts, Beautrelet went to fetch a doctor. The doctor succeeded no better than they had done. The old man did not seem to be suffering. He looked as if he were just asleep, but with an artificial slumber, as though he had been put to sleep by hypnotism, or with the aid of a narcotic. In the middle of the night that followed, however, Isidore, who was watching by his side, observed that the breathing became stronger, and that his whole being appeared to be throwing off the invisible bonds that paralyzed it. At daybreak he woke up and resumed his normal functions, ate, drank, and moved about. But, the whole day long, he was unable to reply to the young man's questions, and his brain seemed as though still numbed by an inexplicable torpor. The next day he asked Beautrelet, "What are you doing here, eh?" It was the first time that he had shown surprise at the presence of a stranger beside him. Gradually in this way he recovered all his faculties. He talked, he made plans. But when Beautrelet asked him about the events immediately preceding his sleep, he seemed not to understand. And Beautrelet felt that he really did not understand. He had lost the recollection of all that had happened since the Friday before. It was like a sudden gap in the ordinary flow of his life. He described his morning and afternoon on the Friday, the purchases he had made at the fair, the meals he had taken at the inn. Then, nothing more. He believed himself to be waking on the morrow of that day. It was horrible for Beautrelet. The truth lay there, in those eyes which had seen the walls of the park behind which his father was waiting for him, in those hands which had picked up the letter, in that muddled brain which had recorded the whereabouts of that scene, the setting, the little corner of the world in which the play had been enacted. And from those hands, from that brain, he was unable to extract the faintest echo of the truth so near at hand. Oh, that impalpable and formidable obstacle, against which all his efforts hurled themselves in vain, that obstacle built up of silence and oblivion. How clearly it bore the mark of Arsène Lupin. He alone, informed, no doubt, that Monsieur Beautrelet had attempted to give a signal, he alone could have struck with partial death the one man whose evidence could injure him. It was not that Beautrelet felt himself to be discovered, or thought that Lupin, hearing of his stealthy attack, and knowing that a letter had reached him, was defending himself against him personally. But what an amount of foresight and real intelligence it displayed to suppress any possible accusation on the part of that chance wayfarer. Nobody now knew that within the walls of a park there lay a prisoner asking for help. Nobody? Yes, Beautrelet. Gaffer Charel was unable to speak. Very well. But, at least, one could find out which fair the old man had visited, and which was the logical road that he had taken to return by. And along this road, perhaps it would at last be possible to find. Isidore, as it was, had been careful not to visit Gaffer Charel's hovel, except with the greatest precautions, and in such a way as not to give an alarm. He now decided not to go back to it. He made inquiries and learnt that Friday was market day at Fresselines, a fair-sized town situated a few leagues off, which could be reached either by the rather winding high road or by a series of short-cuts. On the Friday, he chose the road and saw nothing that attracted his attention, no high-walled enclosure, no semblance of an old castle. He lunched at an inn at Fresselines and was on the point of leaving when he saw Gaffer Charel arrive and cross the square, wheeling his little knife-grinding barrow before him. He at once followed him at a good distance. The old man made 2 interminable waits, during which he ground dozens of knives. Then, at last, he went away by a quite different road, which ran in the direction of Crozant and the market town of Aiguezon. Beautrelet followed him along this road. But he had not walked 5 minutes before he received the impression that he was not alone in shadowing the old fellow. A man was walking along between them, stopping at the same time as Charel and starting off again when he did, without, for that matter, taking any great precautions against being seen. He is being watched, thought Beautrelet. Perhaps they want to know if he stops in front of the walls. His heart beat violently. The event was at hand. The three of them, one behind the other, climbed up and down the steep slopes of the country and arrived at Crozat, famed for the colossal ruins of its castle. There Charel made a halt of an hour's duration. Next he went down to the riverside and crossed the bridge. But then a thing happened that took Beautrelet by surprise. The other man did not cross the river. He watched the old fellow move away, and, when he had lost sight of him, turned down a path that took him right across the fields. Beautrelet hesitated for a few seconds as to what course to take, and then quietly decided. He set off in pursuit of the man. He has made sure, he thought, that Gaffer Charel has gone straight ahead. That is all he wanted to know, and so he is going, where? To the castle? He was within touch of the goal. He felt it by a sort of agonizing gladness that uplifted his whole being. The man plunged into a dark wood overhanging the river, and then appeared once more in the full light, where the path met the horizon. When Beautrelet, in his turn, emerged from the wood, he was greatly surprised no longer to see the man. He was seeking him with his eyes when, suddenly, he gave a stifled cry and, with a backward spring, made for the line of trees which he had just left. On his right he had seen a rampart of high walls, flanked at regular distances by massive buttresses. It was there! It was there! Those walls held his father captive. He had found the secret place where Lupin confined his victim. He dared not quit the shelter which the thick foliage of the wood afforded him. Slowly, almost on all fours, he bore to the right, and in this way reached the top of a hillock that rose to the level of the neighboring trees. The walls were taller still. Nevertheless, he perceived the roof of the castle which they surrounded, an old Louis XIII roof, surmounted by very slender bell turrets, arranged corbel-wise around a higher steeple which ran to a point. Beautrelet did no more that day. He felt the need to reflect and to prepare his plan of attack without leaving anything to chance. He held Lupin safe, and it was for Beautrelet now to select the hour and the manner of the combat. He walked away. Near the bridge he met 2 country girls carrying pails of milk. He asked, "What is the name of the castle over there, behind the trees?" "That's the Château de l'Aiguille, sir." He had put his question without attaching any importance to it. The answer took away his breath. "The Château de l'Aiguille. Oh, but in what department are we? The Indre?" "Certainly not. The Indre is on the other side of the river. This side, it's the Creuse." Isidore saw it all in a flash. The Château de l'Aiguille, the department of the Creuse, l'Aiguille Creuse, the hollow needle, the very key to the document, certain, decisive, absolute victory. Without another word, he turned his back on the 2 girls and went his way, tottering like a drunken man. Chapter 6. An Historic Secret. Beautrelet's resolve was soon taken. He would act alone. To inform the police was too dangerous. Apart from the fact that he could only offer presumptions, he dreaded the slowness of the police, their inevitable indiscretions, the whole preliminary inquiry, during which Lupin, who was sure to be warned, would have time to effect a retreat in good order. At 8 o'clock the next morning, with his bundle under his arm, he left the inn, in which he was staying near Cousien, made for the nearest thicket, took off his workman's clothes, became once more the young English painter that he had been, and went to call on the notary at Éguzon, the largest place in the immediate neighborhood. He said that he liked the country and that he was thinking of taking up his residence there, with his relations, if he could find a suitable house. The notary mentioned a number of properties. Beautrelet took note of them and let fall that someone had spoken to him of the Château de l'Aiguille on the bank of the Creuse. Oh yes, but the Château de Leguy, which has belonged to one of my clients for the last 5 years, is not for sale. He lives in it then? He used to live in it. Or rather, his mother did. But she did not care for it, found the castle rather gloomy, so they left it last year. And is no one living there at present? Yes, an Italian, to whom my client let it for the summer season, Baron Anfredi. Oh, Baron Anfredi, a man still young, rather grave and solemn-looking? I'm sure I can't say. My client dealt with him direct. There was no regular agreement, just a letter. But you know the Baron? No, he never leaves the castle. Sometimes in his motor, at night, so they say. The marketing is done by an old cook, who talks to nobody. They are queer people. Do you think your client would consent to sell his castle? I don't think so. It's an historic castle, built in the purest Louis XIII style. My client was very fond of it, and, unless he has changed his mind... Can you give me his name and address? Louis Valmeras, 34, Rue du Mont Tabor. Beautrelet took the train for Paris at the nearest station. On the next day but one, after 3 fruitless calls, he at last found Louis Valmeras at home. He was a man of about 30, with a frank and pleasing face. Beautrelet saw no need to beat about the bush, stated who he was, and described his efforts, and the object of the step which he was now taking. I have good reason to believe, he concluded, that my father is imprisoned in the Château de Leguy, doubtless in the company of other victims. And I have come to ask you what you know of your tenant, Baron Anfredi. Not much. I met Baron Anfredi last winter at Monte Carlo. He had heard by accident that I was the owner of the Château de Leguy, and as he wished to spend the summer in France, he made me an offer for it. He is still a young man. Yes, with very expressive eyes, fair hair, and a beard? Yes, ending in 2 points, which fall over a collar fastened at the back, like a clergyman's. In fact, he looks a little like an English parson. It's he, murmured Beautrelet. It's he, as I have seen him. It's his exact description. What? Do you think? I am sure that your tenant is none other than Arsène Lupin. The story amused Louis Valmeras. He knew all the adventures of Arsène Lupin and the varying fortunes of his struggle with Beautrelet. He rubbed his hands. Ha! The Château de Leguy will become famous. I'm sure I don't mind, for as a matter of fact, now that my mother no longer lives in it, I have always thought that I would get rid of it at the first opportunity. After this, I shall soon find a purchaser. Only what? I will ask you to act with the most extreme prudence and not to inform the police until you are quite sure. Can you picture the situation? Supposing my tenant were not Arsène Lupin? Beautrelet set forth his plan. He would go alone at night. He would climb the walls. He would sleep in the park. Louis Valmeras stopped him at once. You will not climb walls of that height so easily. If you do, you will be received by 2 huge sheepdogs which belong to my mother, and which I left behind at the castle. Pooh! A dose of poison. Much obliged. But suppose you escaped them. What then? How would you get into the castle? The doors are massive, the windows barred. And, even then, once you were inside, who would guide you? There are 80 rooms. Yes, but that room with 2 windows, on the 2nd story. I know it. We call it the glycine room. But how will you find it? There are 3 staircases and a labyrinth of passages. I can give you the clue and explain the way to you, but you would get lost just the same. Come with me, said Beautrelet, laughing. I can't. I have promised to go to my mother in the south. Beautrelet returned to the friend with whom he was staying and began to make his preparations. But late in the day, as he was getting ready to go, he received a visit from Valmeras. Do you still want me? Rather. Well, I'm coming with you. Yes, the expedition fascinates me. I think it will be very amusing, and I like being mixed up in this sort of thing. Besides, my help will be of use to you. Look, here's something to start with. He held up a big key, all covered with rust and looking very old. "What does the key open?" asked Beautrelet, a little postern hidden between two buttresses and left unused since centuries ago. I did not even think of pointing it out to my tenant. "It opens straight on the country, just at the verge of the wood." Beautrelet interrupted him quickly. "They know all about that outlet. It was obviously by this way that the man whom I followed entered the park. Come, it's fine game, and we shall win it. But by Jupiter, we must play our cards carefully." 2 days later, a half-famished horse dragged a gypsy caravan into Crozant. Its driver obtained leave to stable it at the end of the village, in an old, deserted cart shed. In addition to the driver, who was none other than Valmeras, there were 3 young men, who occupied themselves in the manufacture of wicker-work chairs: Beautrelet and 2 of his Jansen friends. They stayed there for 3 days, waiting for a propitious, moonless night and roaming singly round the outskirts of the park. Once Beautrelet saw the postern. Contrived between 2 buttresses placed very close together, it was almost merged, behind the screen of brambles that concealed it, in the pattern formed by the stones of the wall. At last, on the 4th evening, the sky was covered with heavy black clouds, and Valmeras decided that they should go reconnoitering, at the risk of having to return again, should circumstances prove unfavorable. All 4 crossed the little wood. Then Beautrelet crept through the heather, scratched his hands at the bramble hedge, and half raising himself, slowly with restrained movements, put the key into the lock. He turned it gently. Would the door open without an effort? Was there no bolt closing it on the other side? He pushed. The door opened, without a creak or jolt. He was in the park. "Are you there, Beautrelet?" asked Valmeras. "Wait for me. You 2 chaps, watch the door and keep our line of retreat open. At the least alarm, whistle." He took Beautrelet's hand, and they plunged into the dense shadow of the thickets. A clearer space was revealed to them when they reached the edge of the central lawn. At the same moment, a ray of moonlight pierced the clouds, and they saw the castle, with its pointed turrets arranged around the tapering spire to which, no doubt, it owed its name. There was no light in the windows, not a sound. Valmeras grasped his companion's arm. "Keep still! What is it? The dogs over there? Look!" There was a growl. Valmeras gave a low whistle. 2 white forms leapt forward and, in 4 bounds, came and crouched at their master's feet. "Gently. Lie down. That's it. Good dogs. Stay there." And he said to Beautrelet, "And now let us push on. I feel more comfortable." "Are you sure of the way?" "Yes. We are near the terrace." "And then?" "I remember that, on the left, at a place where the river terrace rises to the level of the ground-floor windows, there is a shutter which closes badly, and which can be opened from the outside." They found, when they came to it, that the shutter yielded to pressure. Valmeras removed a pane with a diamond which he carried. He turned the window latch. First one and then the other stepped over the balcony. They were now in the castle, at the end of a passage which divided the left wing into 2. "This room," said Valmeras, "opens at the end of a passage. Then comes an immense hall, lined with statues, and at the end of the hall a staircase which ends near the room occupied by your father." He took a step forward. "Are you coming, Beautrelet?" "Yes, yes. But no, you're not coming. What's the matter with you?" He seized him by the hand. It was icy cold, and he perceived that the young man was cowering on the floor. "What's the matter with you?" he repeated. "Nothing. It'll pass off." "But what is it?" "I'm afraid." "You're afraid?" "Yes," Beautrelet confessed frankly. "It's my nerves giving way. I generally manage to control them, but today, the silence, the excitement, and then, since I was stabbed by that magistrate's clerk, but it will pass off. There, it's passing now." He succeeded in rising to his feet, and Valmeras dragged him out of the room. They groped their way along the passage, so softly that neither could hear a sound made by the other. A faint glimmer, however, seemed to light the hall for which they were making. Valmeras put his head round the corner. It was a nightlight placed at the foot of the stairs, on a little table which showed through the frail branches of a palm tree. "Halt!" whispered Valmeras. Near the nightlight a man stood sentry, carrying a gun. Had he seen them? Perhaps. At least, something must have alarmed him, for he brought the gun to his shoulder. Beautrelet had fallen on his knees, against a tub containing a plant, and he remained quite still, with his heart thumping against his chest. Meanwhile, the silence and the absence of all movement reassured the man. He lowered his weapon. But his head was still turned in the direction of the tub. Terrible minutes passed. 10 minutes. 15. A moonbeam had glided through a window on the staircase, and suddenly Beautrelet became aware that the moonbeam was shifting imperceptibly, and that, before 10 more minutes had elapsed, it would be shining full in his face. Great drops of perspiration fell from his forehead on his trembling hands. His anguish was such that he was on the point of getting up and running away, but remembering that Valmeras was there, he sought him with his eyes and was astounded to see him, or rather to imagine him, creeping in the dark, under cover of the statues and plants. He was already at the foot of the stairs, within a few steps of the man. What was he going to do? To pass in spite of all? To go upstairs alone and release the prisoner? But could he pass? Beautrelet no longer saw him, and he had an impression that something was about to take place. Something that seemed foreboded also by the silence, which hung heavier, more awful than before. And suddenly, a shadow springing upon the man, the nightlight extinguished, the sound of a struggle. Beautrelet ran up. The two bodies had rolled over on the flagstones. He tried to stoop and see, but he heard a hoarse moan, a sigh, and one of the adversaries rose to his feet and seized him by the arm. "Quick, come along!" It was Valmeras. They went up 2 stories and came out at the entrance to a corridor covered by a hanging. "To the right," whispered Valmeras. "The 4th room on the left." They soon found the door of the room. As they expected, the captive was locked in. It took them half an hour of stifled efforts, of muffled attempts, to force open the lock. The door yielded at last. Beautrelet groped his way to the bed. His father was asleep. He woke him gently. "It's I, Isidore, and a friend. Don't be afraid. Get up. Not a word." The father dressed himself, but, as they were leaving the room, he whispered, "I am not alone in the castle." "Ah? Who else? Ganimard? Shears?" "No, at least I have not seen them." "Who then?" "A young girl. Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, no doubt." "I don't know. I saw her several times at a distance, in the park, and, when I lean out of my window, I can see hers. She has made signals to me." "Do you know which is her room?" "Yes, in this passage, the 3rd on the right." "The blue room," murmured Valmeras. "It has folding doors. They won't give us so much trouble." One of the 2 leaves very soon gave way. Old Beautrelet undertook to tell the girl. 10 minutes later, he left the room with her and said to his son, "You were right, Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran." They all 4 went down the stairs. When they reached the bottom, Valmeras stopped and bent over the man. Then, leading them to the terrace room, "He is not dead," he said. "He will live." "Ah," said Beautrelet with a sigh of relief. "No, fortunately, the blade of my knife bent. The blow is not fatal. Besides, in any case, those rascals deserve no pity." Outside they were met by the dogs, which accompanied them to the postern. Here, Beautrelet found his 2 friends, and the little band left the park. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. This first victory was not enough to satisfy Beautrelet. As soon as he had comfortably settled his father and Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, he asked them about the people who lived at the castle, and particularly about the habits of Arsène Lupin. He thus learnt that Lupin came only every 3 or 4 days, arriving at night in his motor car and leaving again in the morning. At each of his visits, he called separately upon his two prisoners, both of whom agreed in praising his courtesy and his extreme civility. For the moment, he was not at the castle. Apart from him, they had seen no one except an old woman, who ruled over the kitchen and the house, and two men, who kept watch over them by turns and never spoke to them. Subordinates, obviously, to judge by their manners and appearance. "Two accomplices for all that," said Beautrelet in conclusion, "or rather three, with the old woman. It is a bag worth having. And, if we lose no time," he jumped on his bicycle, rode to a gazon, woke up the gendarmerie, set them all going, made them sound the boot and saddle, and returned to Crozant at 8 o'clock, accompanied by the sergeant and 8 gendarmes. Two of the men were posted beside the gypsy van. Two others took up their positions outside the postern door. The last four, commanded by their chief and accompanied by Beautrelet and Valmeras, marched to the main entrance of the castle. Too late. The door was wide open. A peasant told them that he had seen a motor car drive out of the castle an hour before. Indeed, the search led to no result. In all probability, the gang had installed themselves there picnic fashion. A few clothes were found, a little linen, some household implements, and that was all. What astonished Beautrelet and Valmeras more was the disappearance of the wounded man. They could not see the faintest trace of a struggle, not even a drop of blood on the flagstones of the hall. All said, there was no material evidence to prove the fleeting presence of Lupin at the Château de Laguille, and the authorities would have been entitled to challenge the statements of Beautrelet and his father, of Valmeras and Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, had they not ended by discovering, in a room next to that occupied by the young girl, some half-dozen exquisite bouquets with Arsène Lupin's card pinned to them, bouquets scorned by her, faded and forgotten. One of them, in addition to the card, contained a letter which Raymond had not seen. That afternoon, when opened by the examining magistrate, it was found to contain page upon page of prayers, entreaties, promises, threats, despair, all the madness of a love that has encountered nothing but contempt and repulsion. And the letter ended, "I shall come on Tuesday evening, Raymond. Reflect between now and then. As for me, I will wait no longer. I am resolved on all." Tuesday evening was the evening of the very day on which Beautrelet had released Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran from her captivity. The reader will remember the extraordinary explosion of surprise and enthusiasm that resounded throughout the world at the news of that unexpected issue. Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran free! The pretty girl, whom Lupin coveted, to secure whom he had contrived his most Machiavellian schemes, snatched from his claws. Free also Beautrelet's father, whom Lupin had chosen as a hostage in his extravagant longing for the armistice demanded by the needs of his passion. They were both free, the two prisoners, and the secret of the Hollow Needle was known, published, flung to the four corners of the world. The crowd amused itself with a will. Ballads were sold and sung about the defeated adventurer, Lupin's little love affairs, Arsene's piteous sobs, the lovesick burglar, the pickpocket's lament. They were cried on the boulevards and hummed in the artists' studios. Raymond, pressed with questions and pursued by interviewers, replied with the most extreme reserve. But there was no denying the letter, or the bouquets of flowers, or any part of the pitiful story. Then and there, Lupin, scoffed and jeered at, toppled from his pedestal. And Beautrelet became the popular idol. He had foretold everything, thrown light on everything. The evidence which Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran gave before the examining magistrate confirmed, down to the smallest detail, the hypothesis imagined by Isidore. Reality seemed to submit in every point to what he had decreed beforehand. Lupin had found his master. Beautrelet insisted that his father, before returning to his mountains in Savoy, should take a few months' rest in the sunshine, and himself escorted him and Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran to the outskirts of Nice, where the Comte de Gisfard and his daughter Suzanne were already settled for the winter. 2 days later, Valmeras brought his mother to see his new friends, and they thus composed a little colony grouped around the Via de Gève, and watched over day and night by half a dozen men engaged by the Comte. Early in October, Beautrelet, once more the sixth-form pupil, returned to Paris to resume the interrupted course of his studies and to prepare for his examinations. And life began again, calmer, this time, and free from incident. What could happen, for that matter? Was the war not over? Lupin, on his side, must have felt this very clearly, must have felt that there was nothing left for him but to resign himself to the accomplished fact. For, one fine day, his two other victims, Ganimard and Holmlock Shears, made their reappearance. Their return to the life of this planet, however, was devoid of any sort of glamour or fascination. An itinerant ragman picked them up on the Quai des Orfèvres, opposite the headquarters of police. Both of them were gagged, bound, and fast asleep. After a week of complete bewilderment, they succeeded in recovering the control of their thought and told, or rather Ganimard told, for Shears wrapped himself in a fierce and stubborn silence, how they had made a voyage of circumnavigation round the coast of Africa on board the yacht Hirondelle, a voyage combining amusement with instruction, during which they could look upon themselves as free, save for a few hours which they spent at the bottom of the hold, while the crew went on shore at outlandish ports. As for their landing on the Quai des Orfèvres, they remembered nothing about it and had probably been asleep for many days before. This liberation of the prisoners was the final confession of defeat. By ceasing to fight, Lupin admitted it without reserve. One incident, moreover, made it still more glaring, which was the engagement of Louis Valmeras and Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran. In the intimacy created between them by the new conditions under which they lived, the two young people fell in love with each other. Valmeras loved Raymond's melancholy charm, and she, wounded by life, greedy for protection, yielded before the strength and energy of the man who had contributed so gallantly to her preservation. The wedding day was awaited with a certain amount of anxiety. Would Lupin not try to resume the offensive? Would he accept with a good grace the irretrievable loss of the woman he loved? Twice or three times, suspicious-looking people were seen prowling round the villa, and Valmeras even had to defend himself one evening against a so-called drunken man who fired a pistol at him and sent a bullet through his hat. But, in the end, the ceremony was performed at the appointed hour and day, and Raymond de Saint-Véran became Madame Louis Valmeras. It was as though fate herself had taken sides with Beautrelet and countersigned the news of victory. This was so apparent to the crowd that his admirers now conceived the notion of entertaining him at a banquet to celebrate his triumph and Lupin's overthrow. It was a great idea and aroused general enthusiasm. 300 tickets were sold in less than a fortnight. Invitations were issued to the public schools of Paris to send 2 sixth-form pupils apiece. The press sang paeans. The banquet was what it could not fail to be, an apotheosis. But it was a charming and simple apotheosis, because Beautrelet was its hero. His presence was enough to bring things back to their due proportion. He showed himself modest, as usual, a little surprised at the excessive cheering, a little embarrassed by the extravagant panegyrics in which he was pronounced greater than the most illustrious detectives, a little embarrassed, but also not a little touched. He said as much in a few words that pleased all his hearers, and with the shyness of a child that blushes when you look at it. He spoke of his delight, of his pride, and really, reasonable and self-controlled as he was, this was for him a moment of never-to-be-forgotten exultation. He smiled to his friends, to his fellow Jensonians, to Valmeras, who had come specially to give him a cheer, to Monsieur de Gève, to his father. When he had finished speaking, and while he still held his glass in his hand, a sound of voices came from the other end of the room, and someone was gesticulating and waving a newspaper. Silence was restored, and the importunate person sat down again. But a thrill of curiosity ran round the table. The newspaper was passed from hand to hand, and each time that one of the guests cast his eyes upon the page at which it was opened, exclamations followed. "Read it! Read it!" they cried from the opposite side. The people were leaving their seats at the principal table. Monsieur Beautrelet went and took the paper and handed it to his son. "Read it out! Read it out!" they cried louder. And others said, "Listen, He's going to read it. Listen." Beautrelet stood facing his audience, looked in the evening paper which his father had given him for the article that was causing all this uproar, and suddenly, his eyes encountering a heading underlined in blue pencil, he raised his hand to call for silence and began in a loud voice to read a letter addressed to the editor by M. Massiban of the Academy of Inscriptions and Belles-Lettres. His voice broke and fell, little by little, as he read those stupefying revelations, which reduced all his efforts to nothing, upset his notions concerning the Hollow Needle, and proved the vanity of his struggle with Arsène Lupin. "Sir, on the 17th of March, 1679, there appeared a little book with the following title, The Mystery of the Hollow Needle. The whole truth now first exhibited. 100 copies printed by myself for the instruction of the court. At 9 o'clock on the morning of that day, the author, a very young man, well dressed, whose name has remained unknown, began to leave his book on the principal persons at court. At 10 o'clock, when he had fulfilled 4 of these errands, he was arrested by a captain in the guards, who took him to the king's closet and forthwith set off in search of the 4 copies distributed. When the 100 copies were got together, counted, carefully looked through and verified, the king himself threw them into the fire and burnt them, all but 1, which he kept for his own purposes. Then he ordered the captain of the guards to take the author of the book to Monsieur de Saint-Mars, who confined his prisoner first at Pignerol and then in the fortress of the Ile Sainte-Marguerite. This man was obviously no other than the famous man with the iron mask. The truth would never have been known, or at least a part of the truth, if the captain and the guards had not been present at the interview, and if, when the king's back was turned, he had not been tempted to withdraw another of the copies from the chimney before the fire got to it. 6 months later, the captain was found dead on the high road between Gaillon and Mantes. His murderers had stripped him of all his apparel, forgetting, however, in his right boot a jewel which was discovered there afterward, a diamond of the first water, and of considerable value. Among his papers was found a sheet in his handwriting, in which he did not speak of the book snatched from the flames, but gave a summary of the earlier chapters. It referred to a secret which was known to the kings of England, which was lost by them when the crown passed from the poor fool Henry VI to the Duke of York, which was revealed to Charles VII, King of France, by Joan of Arc, and which, becoming a state secret, was handed down from sovereign to sovereign by means of a letter, sealed anew on each occasion, which was found in the deceased monarch's deathbed with this superscription, "For the King of France." This secret concerned the existence and described the whereabouts of a tremendous treasure belonging to the kings, which increased in dimensions from century to century. 114 years later, Louis XVI, then a prisoner in the Temple, took aside one of the officers whose duty it was to guard the royal family and asked, "Monsieur, had you not an ancestor who served as a captain under my predecessor, the great king?" "Yes, sire." "Well, could you be relied upon? He hesitated. The officer completed the sentence, "Not to betray your majesty." "Oh, sire." "Then listen to me." He took from his pocket a little book of which he tore out one of the last pages, but altering his mind, "No, I had better copy it." He seized a large sheet of paper and tore it in such a way as to leave only a small rectangular space, on which he copied 5 lines of dots, letters, and figures from the printed page. Then, after burning the latter, he folded the manuscript sheet in 4, sealed it with red wax, and gave it to the officer. "Monsieur, after my death, you must hand this to the Queen and say to her, 'From the King, madam, for your majesty and for your son.' If she does not understand, sire, you must add, 'It concerns the secret of the needle. The Queen will understand.'" When he had finished speaking, he flung the book into the embers glowing on the hearth. He ascended the scaffold on the 21st of January. It took the officer several months, in consequence of the removal of the Queen to the Conciergerie, before he could fulfill the mission with which he was entrusted. At last, by dint of cunning intrigues, he succeeded one day, in finding himself in the presence of Marie Antoinette. Speaking so that she could just hear him, he said, "Madam, from the late king, your husband, for your majesty and your son," and he gave her the sealed letter. She satisfied herself that the jailers could not see her, broke the seals, appeared surprised at the sight of those undecipherable lines, and then, all at once, seemed to understand. She smiled bitterly, and the officer caught the words, "Why so late?" She hesitated. Where should she hide this dangerous document? At last she opened her book of hours and slipped the paper into a sort of secret pocket contrived between the leather of the binding and the parchment that covered it. "Why so late?" she had asked. It is, in fact, probable that this document, if it could have saved her, came too late, for, in the month of October next, Queen Marie Antoinette ascended the scaffold in her turn. Now the officer, when going through his family papers, came upon his ancestor's manuscript. From that moment he had but one idea, which was to devote his leisure to elucidating this strange problem. He read all the Latin authors, studied all the chronicles of France and those of the neighboring countries, visited the monasteries, deciphered account books, cartularies, treaties, and in this way succeeded in discovering certain references scattered over the ages. In Book 3 of Caesar's Commentaries on the Gallic War, MS, edition, Alexandria, it is stated that, after the defeat of Viridovix by G. Titulius Sabinus, the chief of the Coleti was brought before Caesar, and that, for his ransom, he revealed the secret of the needle. The Treaty of St. Clair-sur-Repte, between Charles the Simple and Rollo, the chief of the Norse barbarians, gives Rollo's name followed by all his titles, among which we read that of Master of the Secret of the Needle. The Saxon Chronicle, Gibson's edition, page 134, speaking of William the Conqueror, says that the staff of his banner ended in a steel point pierced with an eye, like a needle. In a rather ambiguous phrase in her examination, Joan of Arc admits that she has still a great secret to tell the King of France. To which her judges reply, "Yes, we know of what you speak, and that, Joan, is why you shall die the death." Philippe de Comines mentions it in connection with Louis XI, and later, Sully in connection with Henry IV. By the virtue of the needle, the good king sometimes swears. Between these two, Francis I, in a speech addressed to the notables of the Havre in 1520, uttered this phrase, which has been handed down in the diary of Honfleur Burgess: "The kings of France carry secrets that often decide the conduct of affairs and the fate of towns." All these quotations, all the stories relating to the Iron Mask, the captain of the guards and his descendant, I have found today in a pamphlet written by the same descendant and published in the month of June 1815, just before or just after the Battle of Waterloo, in a period therefore of great upheavals, in which the revelations which it contained were likely to pass unperceived. What is the value of this pamphlet? Nothing, you will tell me, and we must attach no credit to it. And this is the impression which I myself would have carried away, if it had not occurred to me to open Caesar's Commentaries at the chapter given. What was my astonishment when I came upon the phrase quoted in the little book before me, and it was the same thing with the Treaty of St. Clair-sur-Repte, with the Saxon Chronicle, with the examination of Joan of Arc, in short, with all that I have been able to verify up to the present. Lastly, there is an even more precise fact related by the author of the pamphlet of 1815. During the French campaign, he being then an officer under Napoleon, his horse dropped dead one evening, and he rang at the door of a castle where he was received by an old knight of St. Louis, and, in the course of conversation with the old man, he learnt that this castle, standing on the bank of the Creuse, was called the Château des Legues, that it had been built and christened by Louis XIV, and that, by his express order, it was adorned with turrets and with a spire which represented the needle. As its date it bore, it must still bear, the figure 1680. 1680, 1 year after the publication of the book and the imprisonment of the Iron Mask. Everything was now explained. Louis XIV, foreseeing that the secret might be noised abroad, had built and named that castle so as to offer the quidnuncs a natural explanation of the ancient mystery. The Hollow Needle, a castle with pointed bell turrets standing on the bank of the Creuse and belonging to the king. People would at once think that they had the key to the riddle, and all enquiries would cease. The calculation was just, seeing that, more than 2 centuries later, Monsieur Beautrelet fell into the trap. And this, sir, is what I was leading up to in writing this letter. If Lupin, under the name of Omfredi, rented from Monsieur Valméras the Château de Leguy on the bank of the Creuse, if, admitting the success of the inevitable investigations of Monsieur Beautrelet, he lodged his 2 prisoners there, it was because he admitted the success of the inevitable researches made by Monsieur Beautrelet, and because, with the object of obtaining the peace for which he had asked, he laid for Monsieur Beautrelet precisely what we may call the historic trap of Louis XIV. And hence we come to this undeniable conclusion that he, Lupin, by his unaided lights, without possessing any other facts than those which we possess, managed by means of the witchcraft of a really extraordinary genius, to decipher the undecipherable document, and that he, Lupin, the last heir of the kings of France, knows the royal mystery of the Hollow Needle. Here ended the letter, but for some minutes, from the passage that referred to the Château de Leguy onward, it was not Beautrelet's, but another voice that read it aloud. Realizing his defeat, crushed under the weight of his humiliation, Isidore had dropped the newspaper and sunk into his chair, with his face buried in his hands, panting. Shaken with excitement by this incredible story, the crowd had come gradually nearer and was now pressing round. With a thrill of anguish, they waited for the words which he would say in reply, the objections which he would raise. He did not stir. Valméras gently uncrossed his hands and raised his head. Isidore Beautrelet was weeping.